Are now recording. All right. So after I got it set up, I had to make sure I clicked on recording. And I was just told over last week that the university is no longer recording the professors to record their Zoom sessions like we had to previous semester and upload them to a cyber campus. But I want to do it anyway because I want to see what we can do with this expensive technology, software and hardware that was purchased, and how we can continue to build upon that to go forward. What did Pope Francis say at the beginning of the pandemic? When you go into a crisis, you can't come out of the crisis the same. You go into a crisis either better, you come out of a crisis either better or worse off than you were. So we're going through this pandemic crisis, and I think that I'm going to insist that I figure out how to master this technology so that we can build upon it and use it to get even more benefit, educational benefit from it. But the university's decided we no longer need to record our video sessions, but I want to do it anyway. And puts them on cyber campus in order to maximize the impact of the class, at least. So. All right, but having said that, you're working on your midterm papers, and everybody in this class I think has gotten their midterm paper back, and you're signing up for a conference session with me. I think just about most people, except for a couple, want to come to my office, which is noteworthy. And so I'll be seeing some of you in my office next week. Well, no, actually starting Wednesday. When people start coming. And so let me now make sure go to the Smart Attendance and to get that done, and go to Smart Attendance and click here, and and close that. So I have some space here, and your attendance number is 218, 218. So let me go to Smart Attendance 218 and go to chatting. 218, put in 218 here, 218, and that is your smart attendance number. Okay. Okay, so what I want to do today is discuss citation, a little bit about citation as I've looked at your midterm papers and noted some of you, of course, seem to have more experience with citation, just generally with citation expectations than others. And so to highlight a point that I've been making throughout the semester, right, that in scholarly writing, you make a truth statement, you make a claim about the truth, and then you also support that truth statement with evidence. And that evidence is in the form of scholarly information published in scholarly sources. So what are scholarly sources? And let me go to, let me show you what a scholarly source is if you don't know already. A scholarly source, as I mentioned, is a source of information that's published through the scholarly peer review process. So if I can do this now here, I can try to show you something which I guess this might be the place to start. Google Scholar is a place to go to find scholarly sources. So if you go to Google Scholar and get this out of the way here, and let's see what comes up. It doesn't come up. It does on my computer because I have a shortcut to it. But if you type in Google Scholar here, yeah, you can see what this is that this is a list of all, not a list, but a Google internet browser search that's set to find and recommend articles or case law for law school students in the United States that have information that has gone through the peer review process. So this is information which, these are articles that have gone through the peer review process. So like I mentioned to you, I think on Friday last week, right, that I had to finish 2 papers and get them sent off on, was it Thursday? They had to be sent out. So I sent those papers out, and now those 2 papers, my name will be removed from those papers. And because like you, I have to write papers, like you have to write papers, I have to write papers too. And I have to write good papers, and you have to be good enough to get published. And I sent out the 2 papers to a journal, academic journal. My name is removed from those papers, and then they are sent to, each one is sent to 2 different professors whose names I don't know. Okay, so they don't know me and I don't know them. So that's called a double-blind peer review process. I'm blind and they're blind. And they're supposed to read my article and decide if it's hopeless, just a complete piece of garbage. And so don't send it back to us. Or maybe send it back to us, but make some more changes. And they typically want changes, lots of changes, lots and lots of changes. And so this process takes months. Typically takes months to get something published. And that's called a peer review process. So when I ask you to use and cite specific information from scholarly peer-reviewed sources to support, develop, and refine your points in your 150-word paragraphs, or in your 3 sources in your midterm paper, that's what I want, is I want you to use and cite specific information to prove to me that your truth claim is the truth. And you might not persuade me, but you have to try. And one way you have to try is provide evidence, including using and citing specific information from scholarly peer-reviewed sources. And of course, the most convenient scholarly peer-reviewed source is the textbook that we've been assigned, because that went through the peer review process as a textbook, right? So, but if you want to do additional research, you can. And Google Scholar is free, and it's available to anybody in the whole world who has access to the internet. And there are lots of databases available, which I don't know if I really want to try to open up here. If I go to, let's see, if I go Catholic University of Korea, you go to Trinity, I don't know, this, because it's not my computer, it's a classroom computer. It might take me some time to get this set up. But university libraries, you go to Michigan? What school are you from? Okay, so like, or your university, you're from Switzerland, right? So your universities, they spend big money on subscriptions to academic data. So you're probably already familiar, you've heard this kind of stuff. So you can see it's not even really working here for some reason. You know, maybe because it's a classroom computer and they want to try to protect it, but it's not accessing, or maybe it's not working now. But I wanted to go to, I wanted to show you the library database. I don't know, maybe you've already used the library database. Have you used the library database for this? Have you gone to this? Well, yeah, of course they have a library database, and of course they have different languages available for the database, because they know that, you know, students, they have a lot of students who are coming from different countries to come here. And I can't really access the database for some reason right now, because there seems to be some problem. But one very easy, convenient source is Google Scholar. And so you, of course, you use keyword searches. So you type in all the keyword searches you want to put in. So if you, let's say you're interested in Europeanization, or you say European Union, so you put quotation marks in order to make sure that it searches for this as a phrase, right? Typically on these databases, you put like "and," right? But you don't have to do that for Google Scholar. You just type in words and phrases. Europeanization. It's just like a Google search. You know, it's just, except that it's already set to look for scholarly peer-reviewed articles. Europeanization, Poland, Sweden, Bulgaria, Greece, all the countries we already covered, the United Kingdom, and just see what comes up. Click on it, and you can see there's 7,520 results. Some of these are books. Oh, here's, you see the member states, your textbook. Ta-da! Cited by 424 people. So let's click on it. You're not going to get the whole, I don't think you're going to get the whole book. What they're going to give you is a portion of it, because they want you to buy the book, right? So if you can so go and see what comes up here. And you can see they give you a little teaser of the book so that you buy the book, because you're not going to like search for the whole book just online, because you won't buy it that way. But if you say next, I guess somewhere here it shows with you all. Page 348, Sweden, Poland, page 350. So that's typically for books. For books that are not really popular, sometimes they'll have the entire PDF file of a book available. But this book, they're not going to make the whole thing available to you, because they want you to buy the book. So, but then you can see, what's this? This is the European Journal of Applied Sociology from an article published 7 years ago. Click on it, what comes up, and they'll I guess this is free. Some of these you can download. Others you might find that, oh, they want you to pay 5, 10, 15, 20 euros. So that's one way to find scholarly peer-reviewed sources on your research, for your research. But your university libraries, they have also subscriptions to ProQuest, Academic Search Complete, EBSCO. There are other databases, and they spend tens of thousands of dollars per year on those databases. So your professors use them. I'm sure I use them because some of these databases are more focused and specific, like ProQuest. ProQuest it's surprisingly good, and I use that a lot. But I use it through the university library site. I used to, or through my own personal resources, because it turns out I think the Catholic University of Korea is no longer subscribing to ProQuest because it costs too much, and the professors here aren't using it enough. Maybe because they're Korean professors and using Korean databases, and I don't use it enough, so I have to. I think it used to be my home county in Ohio, Stark County library system of Stark County, Ohio. They used to have a subscription to ProQuest, and the reason it's really nice, if you buy the complete ProQuest subscription service as a library, it includes access to New York Times daily newspaper. So I don't have to buy a subscription to New York Times for $500 a year. I can use which is nice because I don't make a lot of money. So so that's these are examples of scholarly peer-reviewed sources. And so, and I want you to use and cite specific information from at least 3 different chapters, from I think chapters 1 through 11 of the textbook. And I think everybody in this class has done this, but it's more of an issue in the other classes. Okay, so what do I want to talk about today in our short class? I get really excited talking about nationalism because that's what got me involved in political science, and I think because I come from a nationalistic background, given my background, I think partly because of my father leaving Italy to come to the United States because he was poverty-stricken, and I've always been more interested in politics because he was always interested in politics and international affairs because of his history and his family history about why is Italy the way Italy is. And so that was, for example, a case in why I study European politics. But one of the feedback ideas I think I should talk about here in terms of my comments on your papers is that in explaining the war in Ukraine and Russia, for example, or the outbreak of the Second World War, or the outbreak of the Korean War, or anything in international relations, current or past. One of the points that I always make in my classes when I teach, for example, Introduction to International Relations, is that whenever you try to explain or explain to your grandfather, grandmother, or whomever, why did the Korean War happen? Because they know you're studying here in Korea. You should give an answer that has more than one cause. You should give an answer that has 3 basic dimensions that are interrelated. Anything that happens in international relations has to be explained with elements of explanation from all 3 different levels of analysis that I'm going to cover here. And this comes from one of the more important works in international relations theory by a man by the name of Kenneth Waltz, who died about 12 years ago, who wrote a book called, this is the book. It was his PhD thesis that he wrote. I think he served in the Korean War, and then he came back to the United States after the Korean War and got his PhD at, I think, Columbia University. And like I said, he's been dead. What's this? He's been dead for a while. And he wrote this book, Man, the State and War, Theoretical Analysis. You can see that this book is still in publication, even though it was published, I think, in 1954. So if you look at it, I think this is the anniversary edition, so it's 2018. But the original book was published in 1954, I think. And so since it was published in 1954, it goes to show you that this book is what am I doing wrong here? Go back. Look inside. Okay, so you look inside, and I want to scroll down. And, oh, first published in 1959, sorry. And this person, you know, was at that conference I went to, the International Studies Association. He's about my age, one of the most well-known realist, neo-realist thinkers in international relations. He wrote the foreword to this edition. But what Kenneth Waltz was writing about, he looked at all the explanations for why the Second World War happened. He looked at all the literature, or he surveyed the scholarly literature on what caused the Second World War. And he put that literature in 3 different categories. He said one category of literature focused upon individuals and persons. They explained World War II by looking at what's going on in the head of Adolf Hitler, what was going on in the head of Neville Chamberlain, what was going on in the head of the leaders of these countries leading up to the start of the Second World War. Another category of literature looked at the broader internal political developments and trends within the countries of the world, within the states of the world. So what was going on inside Germany in the 1930s, what was going on inside of the British Empire in the 1930s, what was going on in Stalin's Soviet Union in the 1930s, what's going on in France at this time in the interwar period. And so the first category is individual level of analysis. The category focusing on Hitler, Neville Chamberlain, the Prime Minister of Britain, who appeased Hitler, attempted to use appeasement as a strategy towards Hitler that we described last class, that had disastrous effect because unintentionally actually made war more likely rather than less, even though he was aiming for peace, obviously. So there's the individual level of analysis. Then there's the state level, like what's the nature of German political trends and characteristics inside Germany in the 1930s. So that's the state or national level of analysis. And then the third level of analysis is the international system level. The international system level is the literature that's looking at how did World War II happen, looked at, for example, at the breakdown of the League of Nations system that was created at the end of the First World War with the Treaty of Versailles, that was Woodrow Wilson's President of the United States. He was the main proponent of the League of Nations, which was the forerunner to the United Nations, and the international system. That basically the British Empire was becoming relatively weaker and weaker and weaker. The United States was becoming stronger and stronger and stronger, but the United States was not providing was not playing a more active role in international organization and international diplomacy, despite the fact that under Wilson, it dominated the Treaty of Versailles peace negotiations, because when it entered the war in 1917, it was so much more powerful than the other countries of the world, even though it came in at the end. And the fact that Germany basically gave up because they knew they couldn't defeat the Americans. With the Americans there, they weren't a military offensive threat, but they would just exhaust Germany completely, before Germany could even hope to basically defeat France. So, and so the world was going through changes on an international level, with the British Empire declining in relative strength, and the United States and the Soviet Union becoming more and more strong, and the efforts to organize international affairs that had been so important during the 19th century, during the Concert of Europe phase. It was called the Concert of Europe, like an orchestra concert. And the Concert of Europe was set up right after Napoleon in the Napoleonic Wars, by which the leading powers of Europe came together, all of them together, and attempted to regulate and negotiate their disagreements. Sometimes they still had to fight wars, like the Crimean War, when the Russian Empire attempted to go for it all and knock out the Ottoman Turkish Empire, and the French and the Italians and the British said, no, that's not a good idea to destroy one of the main actors in European international relations. So you still were wars fought, and hundreds of thousands of people died, but not like what happened under Napoleon, and not what happened in 1914 in World War I. And that's explanations at the third level of analysis, the international system level of analysis. And what did Waltz find? Guess what? They're all correct, but they're all partial. There are by themselves, all of them incomplete. So what's the lesson learned, according to Kenneth Waltz in his book from 1959? Any explanation has to include, for anything in international relations, has to include factors at all three levels of analysis. You're not doing a good enough job in explaining why the Korean War happened, or why the Vietnam War happened, or why Russia invaded Ukraine in 2022, unless you include factors of explanation that include factors from all three levels of analysis. Yeah, Putin, you have to understand Putin. That's true. That's one level of analysis. Right? You have to understand what's going on inside of Putin's head and the heads of his advisors. But that's not sufficient. That's necessary, but not sufficient. And this is the nice thing about theory in international relations. A good theory guides your thinking. It directs your thinking. So my point to all of my students is that any explanation of anything in international affairs must have factors at all three levels of analysis. And so you must remind yourself, if you're going to explain why the Korean War happened, or why the Cold War ended, or why the war in Yugoslavia began 30 years ago, or why Russia invaded Ukraine 2 months ago, your explanation has to have, remember, you have to include elements of all three levels of analysis in your explanation. And ideally you have to show how those factors at those three different levels of analysis, also called three different levels of causation, how they relate to each other, right? So you can say, well, how do you relate the international system level to Vladimir Putin? Well, I mean, certainly the fact that the Soviet Union disintegrated and left the United States overwhelmingly powerful, and that is an important factor for explaining, those are two, first off, the international system level. The United States emerged as so overwhelmingly powerful when the Soviet Union fell apart, disintegrated. Vladimir Putin, he was a child of the Cold War. He was not from a famous family in Russia, but he was a bright, impressive young man, and he was monitored and selected in this modern society where people are looking for capabilities to achieve, and he was selected to join the KGB, the Komitet Государственной безопасности, the KGB, the State Committee for Security in English. And the best and the brightest went into the KGB in Russia, in the Soviet Union. That's where the best and the brightest people were often brought into. And he was a top secret police official in East Germany, right on the front lines of the Cold War. So, and so that created a situation where the Cold War and its breakdown put Vladimir Putin in a position of where he's at. And, from his point of view, the Soviet Union, did a lot of great things in the world, including defeat Hitler. Not very minor issue, right? But other things as well, which, we're not, he references all the time, right? In terms of what the Soviet Union is doing in Ukraine, you can see all these copying, almost like cynical mimicking, to throw back in the Americans' face what the Americans used to justify their invasion of Iraq, for example, back in 2003, 19 years ago, when you were born, about how Colin Powell, Secretary of State for George W. Bush, gave a speech to the United Nations Security Council asking for the UN Security Council to approve a US-led attack on Iraq, saying that we have evidence that the Iraqis are preparing biological weapons. And that's what the Russians said a month ago, that the Ukrainians are preparing biological weapon laboratories. And of course, it was wrong. Iraq was not preparing biological weapons. And this came up again because Colin Powell just died 6 months ago. So they were recording repeating his speeches to the United Nations on behalf of the George W. Bush administration. And I remember I was at the American University in Bulgaria at the time, and the Bulgarian police were told in their providing security for the American University in Bulgaria, which is funded by the U.S. government at the time, look for biological weapons. A taxi took me to the university one time, and a Bulgarian policeman, they know I can speak Bulgarian. He leans and he says, well, do you have any anthrax in there? Because the thing was to look for anthrax. And I said, no, anthrax nyama. There is no anthrax here. And like, we're looking for anthrax? And then, of course, and then the second level of analysis is the rise of Russian nationalism. This sense of humiliation, particularly this, the sanctions being placed on Russia, and as I said, the embarrassment and humiliation of the Soviet Union Russian allies, like Saddam Hussein's Iraq being destroyed, and the effort by the United States to eliminate the Assad regime in Syria, another Soviet ally during the Cold War, and the United States destruction of the Gaddafi regime in Libya after the Cold War ended, when the Soviet Union, of course, was no longer around, and like it was no longer around in 2003, and so on. So Russian nationalism all comes together to create these conditions to explain why somebody like Putin needs to invade a country that 30 years ago, when the Soviet Union collapsed, Russia and the Ukrainians and the Belarusian governments all agreed to officially call for the end, declare the end of the Soviet Union under those leaders 30 years ago. This is before Putin became president, of course. So that's why, I'm really bothered by the debates and discussions about what's going on in Ukraine by demonizing Putin. I'm not saying Putin's a good guy, but just like as you can't explain why World War II happened by only blaming Hitler and focusing on Hitler, you've got to focus upon all the context, including national and international, that produced the situation where somebody like Hitler could come to power. I mean, Hitler was a horrible creature, but there are horrible creatures in all countries. The question has to be, how is it that a horrible creature gets power over your country? And you might argue that Donald Trump is a horrible creature, and he became president of the United States. How did that happen? Right? And you have to include the end of the Cold War, the rise of American nationalism, and the breakdown of American consensus about external threats that began with the Vietnam War, long before the Cold War itself ended. And so that's been my contribution or efforts to try to, contribute to the debates over these topics, particularly over Zoom, because so much is going on Zoom. There's all these conferences, international conferences on Zoom about Ukraine now. They start at like 12 at midnight my time here, and they go on till 6 in the morning. We need to focus on Russian nationalism and Russian perspectives on what has been going on in the world during the Cold War and afterwards, to explain what's going on now here in this horrible situation with now there's even talk about nuclear weapons use being a possibility. A couple days ago, the head of the CIA publicly declared that Putin may well try to discourage the United States and other countries from allowing weapons to go into Ukraine by detonating a small nuclear weapon. There's no preparation for that, but the fact that he decided to say it publicly at an event 2 days ago is significant. So that's I thought that in this book, I mean, I think even though this book is old, it's like I said, it's still in publication, which means it's really useful. And it's been a book that I think has really made an impact on students. It's easy to read, and so it's worth talking about. So like you can see here, I have, this lays out, I thought it was first published in 1954. I have to go back and check. Factors at the international system level of analysis. The term that Waltz uses is image. The first image, second image, third image. I think this is the first image actually in the book, the individual level of analysis, the state level and the international system level. And, and of course, political science, international relations focuses a lot on the individual level analysis, like they do a lot of analysis of leadership, what's going on in the head of, Vladimir Putin or Adolf Hitler or Woodrow Wilson. And then the study of nationalism that I'm really interested in is focusing on these levels. this second level, the state level of analysis. But I think that good advice in terms of research and analysis in international relations is to keep in mind that you also have to show how factors at these three different levels of analysis relate to each other. So Putin and the regime that exists in Russia obviously exists because the Cold War, the end of the Cold War, the international system level, has to be a factor used to explain how the regime in Russia under Putin came to exist, obviously. And Putin's view of Russia and the United States and his role in Ukraine is reflecting these factors that all relate to each other. So that's the point. When you're telling a story as to why the Korean War happened, or why the American invasion of Iraq happened, or why the American attack on Libya happened in 2011, you have to include factors from all three levels of analysis in your story, in your analysis. And Putin may well be a horrible creature, but like I said, there are lots of horrible creatures and they're everywhere in all countries. And so to explain why that horrible creature is able to come to power, and even though Donald Trump might have been a horrible creature, he still couldn't do everything he wanted to do. So there was something about the American domestic context, the state level context, that second level of analysis, that's critically important for explaining why Trump was not able to do, even though he is president of the United States, he couldn't do whatever he wanted to do because he was constrained by the domestic political context, the state level factors at the state level of analysis, which are very different in 1930s Germany and very different in 2022 Russia, right? So I thought that was one takeaway to emphasize in my first reading of your midterm papers. And so regarding whether or not the European Union is a force for peaceful conflict resolution, it deserves its Nobel Peace Prize. Yeah, I mean, that's a problematic issue given that, of course, Putin evidently views the expansion of the European Union as a threat. And was it necessarily the case that he was going to view the expansion of the European Union as a threat? 25 years ago, I think there was a different view prevailing in Moscow towards the European Union and NATO. Of course, the European Union and NATO were so powerful relative to, I mean, I remember, 25 years ago, one report was that the entire Russian economy was the size of Walmart. It was the size, or other reports, this is in the 1990s, that the entire Russian economy was the size of Belgium. So obviously, since we talk about motivated reasoning and seeing a world that is self-serving, if I view myself as not having tremendous power capability, I'm going to probably see the outside world in a way that comports with my understanding of what is feasible to me, right? So if there's nothing I can do about the incredibly powerful United States, then I'm not likely to see the incredibly powerful United States as an actor that I can actively oppose because it's hopeless. Yeah, there is an element of psychological systems theory here. The people tend to see worlds based upon their intuitive explanations or estimations of their capabilities as well. And that's true in realist thinking also. And that leads me to a discussion of nationalism, right? Some countries, let me tell you the context for this, right? I mean, I think we political scientists should be doing a lot more prediction, because we should be testing our ideas. And I think, I talked about this last class, about the shift from ascription to achievement as the basis of modernity, right? As for awarding status, the shift from ascription, that you're born into a certain status in society, it's ascribed to your status, versus achievement as the basis of status and respect in society. And the United States is a country that was born modern because it's an immigrant society. People knew that they could change their world, that reality is not given by God, that they could make their reality. And that's pretty much the substance of being modern. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because remember, I visited a friend at the beginning of this year, and Russia was preparing to invade Ukraine, and I predicted wrongly that Ukraine would not resist, or that the resistance would be light. And my estimation was, and it wasn't just me, evidently the Pentagon was making, the US Defense Department was making a similar prediction, and we were all wrong. And I thought, I was looking for, this is what policymakers and political scientists do. I look for historical analogies, and I look back to what happened in 1938 Sudetenland crisis, when the Germany under Hitler demanded that the new state of Czechoslovakia, like the new state of Ukraine, give up the territory that was given to Czechoslovakia at the end of World War I, this new country out of the wreckage of the Austrian and German empires that included a German minority. And in this territory in Czechoslovakia is called the Southern Lands in English. In German, it's called the Sudetenland. And in the Sudetenland, there are about 3 million Germans living there. And Hitler demanded that that territory, the Sudetenland, be taken away from Czechoslovakia and given to Germany, because the German minority there was being oppressed supposedly being oppressed and threatened by the bad Czech government. The Slovaks are considered backward peasants, so they're not really the threat, which is actually an important point, because the Slovak nationalists allied with Hitler. The Germans, I should say, like the Croats did, and like Ukrainian nationalists did against Stalin, because the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And so Chamberlain appeased Hitler and said, okay, well, he's being belligerent. Germany's being belligerent because they feel humiliated by the Versailles Treaty in World War I, so let's appease them, and then they'll become a status quo conservative power. They'll be brought back into the system of a de facto new concert of Europe if we treat them with equality. And that means we're going to allow them to, have their German-speaking populations inside the territory of Germany, and they won't, because this is the terms Hitler's talking about: national self-determination, protection of minorities, and then of course that was wrong. And then Hitler and Germany decided to occupy the rest of the Czech Republic, the rest of Czechoslovakia. And all this time, the Czechs didn't really fight. There was one instance that I posted on my Facebook page where there was a Czech unit that did fight, but the Czechs didn't fight. And they didn't fight because they thought it would be hopeless. I can act like a nationalist if I think I can win. But if I think I'm going to fight and resist, and we'll all be killed, rightly or wrong, we believe that we'll all die, we won't resist. And so I thought that's what would happen with the Ukrainians. That first off, the Ukrainians, since the Americans were saying, we're not going to go fight in Ukraine. NATO is not going to defend Ukraine. They came out and said it, that the Ukrainians would say, well, okay, well, I guess we have to just acquiesce to Germany, Russian demands. And they obviously didn't. So, this, I think I have it here. Do I have it here? Where is it? Maybe it's another file. I sort of mix up my files. Here just a second. Is this it? I opened this up last class. Yeah, so we covered minorities in relationship to the core group, and I'm looking for maybe. I think this is it here. Okay, so the likelihood that communities of people will act nationalistically, include fight and die for an independent state, depends upon their perceived relative power capability. So, I think I have it here. This checklist I might have shown you in a previous class, taken from this book, right? In terms of predisposition to act nationalistically. Now, obviously, if you're China, you have a sense of your military and economic capabilities, double plus, full participation by the adult population, that they're politically aware. In other words, that they are observing politics and they are public opinion and they are aware of politics. And then the change-oriented elite in China, trying to justify and advocate their pro-change, pro-reform policies in terms of making China great again. Do they express those terms in terms of what we need to make our nation strong and proud and powerful in the world? Double plus all the way down here, right? So you expect to find predispositions to stereotype, to perceive the world in terms of threats and opportunities for the nation, and to overestimate relative power capabilities here in East Asia in particular. And I said to explain European integration, you look at Europe, pretty strong in all these different elements here. Of course, the fact that they're Christians and they're European Aryans and white Caucasians and so on is a little bit weaker. But then here, you see that with the so-called Republican alliance that's opposing Marine Le Pen in France today, for example, that the socialists and the Gaullists will ally to support Macron to make sure Marine Le Pen doesn't win. But this book is 20 years old, 21 years old already. So you do have a counterly challenging the European integration in France. But so I go through, you look through these different groups, and how do you explain the different behavior of the Czech minority versus the Ukrainian minority? And if you look at the nationalist movements in the past, if you look at, for example, Eastern Europe, number one are categories of national groups, of ethnic groups that are so relatively powerful compared to their situation by their neighbors that sooner or later they're going to fight for and win national self-determination. So examples include Russian politics, Russian nation emerging out of the Russian Empire, Polish nationalism would be successful, Magyar or Hungarian nationalism would be successful sooner or later. Again, in often very violent processes, Romanians, Bulgarians, Greeks, and Ukrainians. And this is from my professor from a course I took with him 35 years ago, and he put Ukrainians in that category. But I remember him also saying that there was always this debate about how strong Ukrainian nationalism was, because there was always a thought that maybe Ukrainian nationalism was an elite phenomenon, something like the college professors and the teachers and the poets and it might share. And the question is, how deep is it among the mass of the population? And evidently, it's pretty deep, as we're seeing now in Albanians. Number two, these are categories in which they will only succeed in gaining their own state for their nation if the international system is favorable to it. In other words, they have a great power patron who will support them because it's useful for the great power. And those include, these are marginal cases, Slovak nationalism, often allied with the Germans, and then again with the Soviets. Slovakia, many Slovak nationalists don't like these Czechs because they think the Czechs look down upon them as backward minority that we covered last class. But marginal, right? The Czechs, and I remember even when I was in Poland, Poles make fun of Czechs. He said, the Czechs, they don't want to fight like we Poles. We Poles, we fight, we're fighters. But the Czechs, they wimp out. And they wimp out because they're small, surrounded by Germans, right? Croats, Serbs, and Slovenes. And these are backed up by Germany and Serbs by Russia. And then number three, these people have a strong primary terminal identification. Like they feel really strongly about being Macedonian, but they think they don't have the capability in their own estimation to dream and fight for a truly sovereign independent state. So they make all these compromises. Like, well, we'll get the European Union and NATO to protect us. And that's the best we can hope for, right? And the Macedonians as well. But you see, Ukraine's under that category. And this is important for explaining why these people did not fight when the Germans invaded, and these people did, along with the fact that, of course, in 1939, NATO and the European Union didn't exist. So even though Joe Biden said, we're not going to fight in Ukraine, they all know European Union and NATO are there, and that's something they will ultimately want to join. And I've even heard Ukrainian nationalists applauding this war. This is a because finally we are establishing once and for all a separate Ukrainian national identity from the Russians. If it was fluid and questionable before, it's not anymore. And my professor was an expert on the Middle East, so he put in this category number one, Turkish nationalism, Iranian nationalism, Azeri nationalism, Arab nationalism. How many Arabs there are, it's questionable. I mean, my professor later in the 1990s told me that he thought that Egypt was a nation state. Even though they speak Arabic and they call themselves Arabs, they're first Egyptians. They're not Arabs first intensity. Their first identity, their first primary, because we have multiple identities, you and I, right, is Arab. And that might well spell a death knell for pan-Arabism. And how strong is Arab nationalism? Israeli policy must make sure that pan-Arabism fails for Israel to survive. Under two, Israeli nationalism. Israel exists because the United States supports it. During the Cold War, Israel was seen as the democratic bastion against the allies of the Soviet Union, Saddam Hussein's Iraq, and the Assad regime in Syria. Armenian nationalism, Kurdish nationalism. Of course, they're allying now with the United States against Iran and pan-Islamic, pan-Arab sectarian nationalism. So they might pull this off. I mean, they already got basically northern Iraq is de facto independent. But everybody knows what I'm telling you here. Turkey, where there are 10 to 15 million Kurds. Iran, where there are 3 to 4 million Kurds. Syria, there's 3 million Kurds. They all know this game. We all know this game. But the United States, really relies upon the Kurds, like they relied upon allied with the Albanians against the Serbs. This is and Georgian nationalism. And level 3, Assyrians. These are the Christians, Chaldean Christians of Syria. They're about 10% of the population. They tend to be an advanced minority. Remember, the danger for these people is that their loyalty is suspect. The belief, the stereotype that these people provide towards these people, or don't have it here, I have any other, the advanced minorities, that they're not really loyal to the United States or Germany or Poland. They're loyal to themselves. And so during wartime, that could produce genocide, because what do you do with traitors? You kill them. Armenians in that category. So I think that this and this is one part of the explanation as to why the war is going on in Ukraine, that even though NATO under Joe Biden said, we're not going to fight in Ukraine, it's there. The West exists. It exists in the form of NATO and the European Union. And Ukrainian nationalists want to join the West. And they think sooner or later the West will help them. And so unfortunately or fortunately, whatever, that's been one of the impacts of the international system in contributing to this, explaining this war going on in Ukraine. The Ukrainians, they don't think they want to join the West, Ukrainian nationalists. And they're desperately trying. And even the European Union leadership saying, okay, maybe we'll consider Ukraine's application. Ursula von der Leyen, the chairperson of the European Commission, president of the European Commission, made that statement. So what's going on now is they're fighting over the borders of what will be, I think, eventually the partition of Ukraine. And, but there was no love. Again, this notion of psychological balancing and motivated reasoning and dissonance theory. If you look at any Wikipedia entry he is the folk hero of Ukrainian nationalists. And he's the Nazi fascist that Vladimir Putin is referring to. He was the leader of Ukrainian nationalists, one of the most important leaders of Ukrainian nationalists during the Second World War. And he was killed by KGB agents in Munich, Germany in 1959. He was the son of a Greek Catholic priest. But again, and they have here, they highlight how controversial it is. And Poles had no love for this movement. I remember when I was in Poland, Polish newspapers would comment upon these Polish, this Ukrainian army that was led by him, attacking Poles as well, because Poles viewed Ukrainians as backward, silly peasants, right? The way Germans viewed Poles as backward, silly peasants. And so here you see, massacres of Polish civilians that Polish nationalists all know about. But today, because my enemy is my friend, they're being so warm and helpful to Ukrainian refugees coming to Poland, because the bigger problem is Moscow. And this is today Western Ukraine. You can see it here. Oh, they got a map here of the territories that were divided up and moved around. Yeah. So there you see Lutsk. There's That's part of Poland today. Lviv, that's part of Ukraine today. This is all, the dividing line is here now. This is all part of Western Ukraine. So what will happen with this area? If I'm right, it's hard for me to believe that Russian nationalists are not going to go for Kiev. Kiev, for them, is like Jerusalem to Israeli Jewish nationalists. It's the cradle of Russian Slavic Christian civilization. How can they give up Kiev? It's like giving up Kosovo for Serbs or giving up Jerusalem for Israelis. So this war is very obviously horrible for them, but it's also dangerous for us because this is not over by any stretch of the imagination. It's not going to end in a couple weeks. Well, on that charming note, that's where we'll stop today in our short class. So, we'll continue talking about this on when we have longer time on Friday. Okay, that's all. All right, bye.